A single spark ignites the heart. But if we turn when justice calls, the chains we forge will bind us all. When truth is silenced, when lies take hold, the cost is freedom, the soul grows cold. No one stands tall while another must fall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, defending every voice, defending every right. For the moment we falter, the moment we stall, we lose our own freedom when we let others fall. You can't stand free while others kneel. When justice fades, it's freedom they steal. An innocent condemned, a crime unspoken, and with it the bond of liberty is broken. No tyrant rules without our consent. Oppression thrives where silence is spent. Stand for the weak, the silence is small, or freedom will crumble for us all. We're mavericks of freedom, guardians of the light, fighting for the truth, for what is just and right. For the rights of one are the rights of all. We rise or we fall by answering the call. Even those we may oppose deserve the rights we all uphold. For if we deny them what is fair, we build our own prison in despair. The fight's not easy, it never will be, but justice for one is the key to be free. We stand as mavericks, together we strive, defending the rights that keep freedom alive. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, upholding every truth, protecting every right. When one is oppressed, we're all in the thrall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. So take a stand, let your courage rise. Defend the truth, don't compromise. For the soul of the world, the writing's on the wall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all.
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Good evening, Mavericks. Welcome back. Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister, met King Charles today. Very significant meeting. Not saying the quiet part at all, let alone out loud, but it was all about asserting Canada's sovereignty, which will run in a way, in a contradictory way to what a lot of people are telling you these days, saying that that our country isn't real because we're just controlled by the monarch. In fact, the opposite is on display today because the king is being supportive, not directing, while at the same time the new Prime Minister asserting Canada's sovereignty in the face of threats to our sovereignty from a country that was formerly our best friend and ally. Now, that's all in question. And we'll dig into that tonight as the man in the White House who is mocking us, who is threatening our sovereignty, is also defying his own courts, pushing ahead with deportations, mass deportations, even though a judge ordered some of these deportations to be paused pending review. He just went ahead and shipped a bunch of people to El Salvador anyway. We'll get into that as well tonight on Maverick News. These are translating into, I would say, dark times indeed, especially for times that are supposed to be the beginning of a new golden era for a country that was supposed to be the freest on earth. We'll check that against that list of principles that our friends from ourprinciples.ca highlighted and outlined for us the other night. I just thought it might be an interesting exercise to go through to see if we're living up to those principles, to see if our leaders are living up to those principles, to see if Donald Trump is living up to those principles. Conservative principles, I would say. And I think it's a worthwhile exercise to go through tonight, especially as we see something happening, or at least I see something happening, that is very concerning. Not even a possible, it is. This is a descent into darkness, especially for one man. One man who I think may have started out with the best of intentions. It certainly appeared that way, but like so many others, so many other human beings, as he stares into that darkness, Donald Trump may be consumed by it and may become the very kind of monster that he says he is fighting. It's a trap, and he may have fallen into it. We'll see. Only time will tell. But with that in mind, I begin tonight with this video slide that will segue into the opening of tonight's Maverick News program.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals. Defenders of individual rights and freedoms. Credible. Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
So we begin our coverage tonight with this post from the royal family on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Here's the post. It says, from the royal family, this afternoon at Buckingham Palace, the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, was received in audience by the King. Here's the photo that they posted. So as you can see, they did meet, but what did not happen is, I don't think even one time today was Donald Trump's name mentioned, and yet that was clearly the elephant in the room. More than an elephant, because the 51st state talk, the talk of annexing Canada, the tariff war, trade war, and make no mistake, it is a war. That was really what precipitated all of this. And we're going to go now to London, England, and pick up this news conference with Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to His Majesty King Charles III for his warm welcome and gracious hospitality that he showed me, he showed Canada with today's audience. We have a steadfast defender in our sovereign. Also want to thank Prime Minister Starmer for a valuable discussion on how our long-standing economic and security partnership can help build growth, prosperity, and security for our citizens today. As Prime Minister Starmer mentioned in our session, Canada and the United Kingdom share a history, we share values, we share a sovereign. And those shared values between Canada and the United Kingdom, Canada et la République française, ont été démontrés avec notre partenariat pour l'Ukraine. They are demonstrated through the leadership of Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, and Canada's participation in the coalition of the willing for Ukraine. Our relationship with two of the founding peoples, two of the three founding peoples of Canada, date back to the 1500s. It's a relationship that is built on values. It's a relationship that is built on economic interests and purpose. Nous sommes prêts à défendre nos valeurs communes, à répondre aux nouvelles menaces mondiales et à apporter des changements qui profitent autant Canadiens et Canadiennes et qu'aux Britanniques et les Français et les Françaises. Notre histoire commerciale commune a commencé il y a plus de 350 ans ici et s'est développée dans les premiers temps de la Confédération avec les préférences impériales et se développe aujourd'hui dans le cadre de nos nouvelles relations commerciales. You know, it's a long history of commercial relationships that extend back over the centuries. We're in Canada House, which is marking its 100th anniversary, so but a fraction of that. And I'm reminded of it because, of course, it looks out on Nelson's column. And you can find another column dedicated to Nelson in Place Jacques-Cartier à Montréal. And the flag that flies over that column includes the fleur-de-lis for France, the shamrock for Ireland, the thistle for Scotland, the rose for England, and the white pine for the peuple autochtone du Canada. That is an example of the diversity of Canada. The wonder of Canada is built off of that diversity. And it's through that and through those values that we have built our country. It is on those values that we will make our decisions and build our relationships in this world. So I'm grateful for the welcomes and the constructive discussions both of Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron. And with that, I'd be pleased to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. We will begin with questions from the UK delegation. Over to you for the first question.
Anything could happen now. It's the UK delegation. Please.
Thank you.
I look forward. Thank you for coming.
You've seen the economic forecasts. They're not great. Are you certain that Canada can avoid a recession? And are you reopening trade negotiations with the UK?
Well, there's a lot in that question. First off, look, this trade uncertainty, the actual tariffs, but then also the uncertainty around what other trade actions could be taken by the world's largest economy are having an impact. They're having an impact on the United States itself. That impact on the United States will continue to grow. The impact of weakening U.S. economy has an impact on everyone else. But of course, it has a direct impact as well on the affected countries. It's not welcome. What we see is a number of things, a number of measures that we can take ourselves. We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We don't pretend to control policies of other countries. What we can control is our own domestic economic policy. There's many opportunities in Canada. It's a very strong economy, but it could be much stronger. We could have one Canadian economy instead of 13. We can build the millions of houses that Canadians need. We can diversify our trading relationships. We can build new trading corridors, and we can fully realize what Canada is, which is an energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We are going to get stronger, while those who take trade actions get weaker.
Next question. Welcome back, Lise Doucette of
Come
the
home.
BBC.
Come home.
Canadian,
Yes.
Brunswicker. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. You came on this first foreign trip making it clear that you needed public support for Canada as it faces not just a trade war. You say you were enthusiastic. Enthusiastic. That was your word today. Enthusiastic support as Canada faces not just a trade war, but threats to its sovereignty. You didn't get that in London. You didn't even get a press conference next to Sir Keir Starmer. Do you regret that? And if you can't take that back to Canada, tell us what is the top thing you achieved in the last 24 hours that you can go back to Canada and I say that you can say they have our back.
Great to see you, Lise. I'll say a couple of things. As I said when I was sworn in, which was just Friday, so you don't have to go far back in the BBC archives to find the clip. As I said then, we don't need another country to validate our sovereignty. We are sovereign. We don't need praise from another country. We are proud in and of ourselves. I would point out that the Prime Minister made a point of referring to our sovereignty, made a point of referring to our shared sovereign in King Charles III. So if you're looking for some evidence to your question. You have both my statement of Friday and you have that of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Look, this 36 hours, and that is what it is effectively, away from Canada, the focus is on security, deepening security partnerships with France, with the United Kingdom. Those discussions are necessarily sensitive. They're revealed in the full course of time. I'm encouraged by the progress that's been made. Secondly, advancing the support for Ukraine that's very necessary. You may have seen that I've invited President Zelensky to the G7. I look forward to hosting him in Canada in June. There are a host of other measures that we are taking as part of the coalition willing to support that. And it also includes economic opportunities with respect to, for example, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, broadening out existing trade relationships that are functioning quite well, and I mean both CETA with respect to the provisional arrangements around CETA with respect to the European Union, where our trade has grown by more than 60%, and similarly with the UK FTA. So we are taking back a lot, but we're also taking back a deepening of our core partnerships, which is the objective. And we're 2/3 of the way through. And if you'd like to come to Iqaluit, you will see more. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now begin the Canadian delegation portion. À la délégation canadienne, on va prendre une vingtaine de minutes de questions. C'est à vous.
Prime Minister Brian Platt with Bloomberg. There's been a lot of talk on this trip about cooperation in general between Canada and the UK and Canada and France, but there's areas where that cooperation is not happening right now. With the UK, the trade talks, the free trade deal between the two countries, those talks are stalled. And the UK so far has chosen not to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, whereas Canada has retaliated. Did you bring up any specific ways, either on the restarting trade talks or on coordinating retaliation in your meetings today?
Well, look, we take our own decisions with respect to our bilateral trade relationships with the United States. We're not trying to organize a coordinated retaliation. Other countries will take those decisions. For example, what we can do are a series of measures, and there are limits ultimately to this, but there's a series of measures that have maximum impact on the United States and minimum impact on Canada. Those measures that we take might have a different impact on the UK, on France. So look, we don't look for that form of coordinated retaliation. That's not helpful necessarily to those countries, but it's not helpful to the overall process. What we're looking for with respect to the United States is to have a more comprehensive discussion of and negotiation of our overall commercial and security relationship. And when the United States is ready to have that conversation, we're more than ready to sit down.
Did you bring up the stalled trade talks in your meetings?
Look, we have a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, which covers 99% of goods that are traded. We have a free trade agreement with the European Union, which covers 99% of the goods that are traded. There are issues with respect to agriculture. No, it wasn't my top priority today. My top priorities related to security, related to Ukraine, related to issues related that we will bring to the table in the G7, specifically in and around AI, critical metals and minerals, and the evolution of the commercial system. Thank you.
Bonjour, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Vos adversaires à Ottawa vous accusent de n'avoir rien accompli de tangible aujourd'hui avec ce voyage-là et de mener une opération de relations publiques préélectorale. Qu'est-ce que vous leur répondez?
Non, non, c'est pas correct du tout. Hein. Mes adversaires disent beaucoup de choses tous les jours qui ne sont pas correctes. Non, c'est important. On a eu des discussions très importantes, très concrètes avec le président de la France, et, y compris les discussions sur la sécurité fondamentale de notre pays, de la coopération dans les manières de la défense de notre pays, des discussions sur l'Ukraine et un renforcement de notre partenariat avec la France et puis avec le Royaume-Uni en ce qui concerne l'intelligence artificielle. Je comprends, c'est difficile pour l'opposition de comprendre tout cela parce qu'ils utilisent tout le temps des slogans de 3 mots. Mais ça c'est le monde actuel, c'est pas le monde inventé.
Campagne électorale.
Non, pas encore.
Hello, Prime Minister. Catherine Cullen from CBC. I noticed you said we have a steadfast defender in our sovereign. Behind closed doors, did any of the leaders you met with today offer assurances that they would have Canada's back if Donald Trump uses greater economic force or more to annex or absorb Canada?
Well, I would know. Let me state the obvious, which is that all of us are members of NATO. All of us respect Article 5 of NATO. So the or more part of your question is unthinkable. What we did discuss is, particularly with France, is deeper security and military cooperation, which is in the interest of overall global security. And we did discuss in both cases deepening of our economic ties. Thank you.
Prime Minister Mike Lucas with CTV News. I take your point earlier on a number of our allies talking about our sovereignty today. But nobody's come out forcefully and said those comments about the 51st state are just not on. Do you think that our traditional allies are not sticking their necks out because they're concerned that if they say something that'll anger President Trump, that they'll be next?
I think I would take seriously what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said today. I don't think one needs to respond to every comment about another country. Look, we can stand up for ourselves. It's Canada strong. We can stand up for ourselves. We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful. They're not helpful, and they need to stop before and conversation about our broader partnership with the United States. But we're Canada. We don't need other people to come to our aid. Come on. C'est pas nécessaire d'avoir d'autres pays nous aident. Nous sommes Canada, le Canada fort. Okay.
You don't think it'd be helpful that they come out and say something?
We have other things. Look, when the Prime Minister of Canada sits down with the President of France or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, we talk about our relationships and where we have responsibilities, not what others are doing. Madame.
Mr. Carney, Stephanie Levitz with Globe and Mail. We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know, because I know you know this. You know that these requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister. So I'm complying with the rules of the Ethics Commissioner, going through the processes and all these things that are necessary. And I will remind you, and I'll remind Canadians again, that the Leader of the Opposition cannot find it. And look, you look at the questions this evening, you look at the nature of the discussions, look at the nature of discussions I had with the President of France, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The Leader of the Opposition would not be capable of having those discussions because the Leader of Opposition refuses to get his security clearance, something that it took me a few weeks to get. And he has been the Leader of the Opposition for 3 years. So I comply with my responsibilities, I comply with the rules well in advance, and the Leader of the Opposition doesn't take his responsibilities at a time of, well, you should take these responsibilities at any time, but it's particularly remarkable given the stakes in global geopolitics at the moment.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now. with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you
What
sought
possible
to avoid?
conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
So you say you are not open to any conflict of interest?
Yes.
Someone spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will. I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country. I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner. And I will continue to comply with those rules.
Bonjour, Émilie Bergeron, la presse canadienne. Monsieur Carney, vous avez dit que vous voulez bâtir des infrastructures énergétiques d'ouest en est et d'est en ouest et vous voulez développer des partenariats énergétiques avec l'Europe. Est-ce que vous avez discuté, par exemple, de LNG et quel échéancier vous vous donnez pour avoir des projets d'infrastructures bâtis au Canada? 2, 3 ans?
D'accord. Premièrement, je suis ouvert à des projets ouest à l'est, mais ce n'est pas une décision. C'est pas seulement à moi de faire cette décision. Il faut avoir un projet, comme vous l'avez mentionné, un projet actuel, pas seulement un conseil. Il faut avoir l'appui, le soutien des provinces, le soutien des Premières Nations qui seront été affectées. Alors, il y a beaucoup à faire avant d'avoir un projet actuel qui fonctionne. On verra.
Vous souhaitez diversifier les marchés canadiens, donc comment vous pouvez faire ça rapidement tout en prenant...
Oui, ça prend du temps, ça c'est sûr. Ça prend du temps de faire des grands projets. Et c'est une des raisons pour lesquelles il faut identifier les provinces et le fédéral, identifier les projets qui sont dans l'intérêt national. Et ça, ce sera un processus entre nous.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. You told your defense minister to review the F-35 contracts, and what I want to know is what exactly are you talking about? What's on the table exactly?
Well, the way Cabinet works, or at least the way Cabinet works in my government, is the Defense Minister and I had a conversation. The Defense Minister raised the issue with me. We had a discussion about Canada's options, and the fact is that under the contract, as you may know, after a certain number of purchases, then we have options on subsequent aircrafts. Given the geopolitical environment, given the fact that there are options, given the need for value for money, given the possibility of having substantial production of alternative aircraft in Canada, as opposed to sending, as we have been, on average 80 cents of every dollar to the United States, it's prudent and in the interest of Canada to review those options, and that's what the process that the Defense Minister has initiated.
Is this something that your allies are asking you about, or what is it that you're telling your allies with respect to this? My understanding is that President Macron, for example, is shopping around, don't buy U.S., buy European military goods, and that they have replacements.
Well, I think, well, I can tell you what's in the public domain. I can tell you in the public domain that for example, Portugal the government of Portugal is taking steps to diversify their supply. What's also in the public domain is a very substantial effort in Europe to so-called rearm Europe, which is a significant consolidation and increase in the amount of defense spending in Europe. Now, that is of interest to us as Canada because as a potential alternative supplier, it creates the potential to create supply chains that mean that Canadian companies are participating in the development of these defense systems, and we are actively exploring. And this, full disclosure, this is one of the discussions that I had both in Paris and in the UK was the potential participation. Now, the UK is not formally in that, but we can see, particularly given our security posture in Europe, given potential steps in Ukraine, given our own security needs, that diversification of our suppliers in a way that ensures that as much as possible of that production resides in Canada and benefits Canadians in multiple ways is a prudent thing to do. That's what I can tell you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Joël Denis Bellavance de la presse. On est tous choqués au Canada par le comportement de Donald Trump et des États-Unis.
We'll stick with it for a little while longer. I didn't really think we would be following this as long as we are following it, but
Merci pour votre question. C'est une bonne question.
so many issues,
Nous sommes dans une situation,
so many, so important right now to everyone.
Comme les Canadiens et Canadiennes,
So we'll let the man continue to speak.
Diviser des choses qu'on peut contrôler, comme vous le savez, on peut mettre chez nous dans le domaine économique domestique et des choses qu'on ne peut pas contrôler. À ce moment-ci, c'est
And we'll be going to Pierre
d'avoir
Poilievre shortly,
l'influence
the conservative leader,
C'est pas
for
normal.
our American viewers or
Normalement,
others
on a des
around the world
discussions
who
et,
don't know who that
les
is.
Américains prennent leurs décisions, c'est correct, mais normalement, on a des décisions, des discussions avec eux. C'est pas exactement le cas maintenant. Nos intérêts, selon moi, nos intérêts sont assez alignés que ça va changer dans un certain temps.
Carney
C'est
also
pas
met with
clair
Macron.
Ouais.
Je vous pose la question, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, nous devons prendre des décisions qui vont nous affecter pour les années à venir concernant nos relations avec les Américains.
Ce qui est clair est que nos relations commerciales sont trop concentrées aux États-Unis. Ce qui est clair est que nos relations sécuritaires sont trop concentrées aux États-Unis. Il faut diversifier, ça c'est clair. Alors, c'est une des raisons pour laquelle ma première visite à Paris et à Londres. D'accord.
Tonda McCharles with the Toronto Star. In Canada today, your political opponent, Mr. Poilievre, said that he would axe the industrial price on carbon. And I'd like to understand from you if you think that at this time, with all the threats against many of our big mainstay industries, which also are large emitters, if you think that your plan to tax them remains a viable and publicly supported plan.
Yeah. So our plan, and in fact the regime that's in place in Canada, and a variant of this regime is in place. There are some variances, you know, Tonda, between the provinces, but a variant of this linked to California is in place with Quebec and British Columbia, is to have a form of price for the largest, on carbon, for the largest emitters, said differently, the largest polluters. Now, what we are doing is changing that system or improving that system so that the price that's paid can be reduced by so-called carbon credits that are allocated. We're adding additional ones, we will be adding additional ones that ensure that the polluters are paying so that Canadians can receive support to reduce their own emissions. So it's a more efficient system. It works better for the large polluters. It works better for Canadians. And it also is a system that recognizes the new trading reality. So we have to be able to connect the dots, something that the opposition is totally incapable of doing, proven themselves totally incapable of doing. So on the one hand, we have our largest trading partner, as we've been discussing, attacking us, putting tariffs on us. On the other hand, we have the opportunity to diversify trade. Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. So we are able to think one step ahead. We're able to go out and see the world. We're able to help Canadian companies prepare. And you know what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years from now? If I have the pleasure of being in front of you, you'll be asking me the question, if we didn't do this, if we didn't help our companies get more prepared, the Americans are going to start caring about this again. They have elections every 4 years. They cared a great deal about this 3 months ago. Now all of a sudden they don't care about it. They're going to care about it again. We have an enormous opportunity here in Canada. The United Kingdom has an enormous opportunity. France has an enormous opportunity. Europe has an enormous opportunity to leapfrog over American companies where they're trying to turn back the clock and look inwards. We're going to take that opportunity. We're going to take that opportunity. It's going to create jobs, and it's going to create new markets for our country.
President Trump has, thank you. My follow-up is that on April 2nd, President Trump is promising a much larger global tariff regime, including bringing back in the threatened 25% across the board tariffs on Canada. And you've talked about the need for retaliatory tariffs at a dollar-for-dollar level. One assumes the punch coming is going to be much greater.
Yeah.
How much more are you prepared?
Sorry.
You asked your question.
Yeah.
How much more are you prepared to go in terms of the monetary hit back, and how much do you think Canada can absorb? Can we?
This is an important question. It's a very important question. There is a limit, given the relative size of our economies, the extent to which we should match U.S. tariffs. Right now, what the government has proposed, and with the 150 billion odd identified products, are products that have, as I said earlier, maximum impact in the United States and limited, but not zero, it's limited impact in Canada that we can affect. And my government's commitment is that we will use all of the revenues from those tariffs to support Canadian workers that are affected by the U.S. trade actions. Pierre Poilievre's commitment, as his commitment is anytime anything changes, is he's going to use it to cut taxes. So if you aren't paying any taxes because you don't have a job, you're out of luck. Okay, we're going to go help those who are affected by it, as we should, as Canadians want us to, in my view. Now, so just to summarize on your question, there are limits. Now we'll see what happens April 2nd. We'll see what happens after that. We are not going to take an action that we think is not ultimately going to influence the United States, and certainly not one that is outright harmful to Canada, given the overall approach. So this will be very deliberate, and there is a limit, full stop. There is a limit to matching these tariffs dollar for dollar, given the fact that our economy is a tenth the size of the United States. Thank you.
Let's put that into our press conference. Thank you.
That's it.
Okay.
Bon, merci. La réponse en français. Il y a les...
Okay, so she's just going to deliver that in French again. So we don't need to stick around for that. What we will do, though, is show you... What did I have here? Oh, yeah, the F-35 thing. Carney saying that Canada is reviewing it in part because there may be opportunities to have production facilities set up here for components that would go into maybe an alternative fighter jet, maybe something from France or Europe. And Mike McCarrick, who was on last night, sent me this through the day today, showing that, in fact, Canada already has some of the production for some of the components for the F-35 in Canada, including in a facility out in Winnipeg through Magellan Aerospace, where they produce the tail section for the F-35. So that's just an interesting fun fact on the F-35 that will no doubt be part of the equation as Canada reviews everything with its contract, its F-35 contract. But again, he didn't really talk about the real reason that contract is being reviewed, just as Europe is reviewing its integration with U.S. defenses and equipment. It's about the possibility of the United States hitting the kill switch on an F-35. And by that, I mean just turning off all of the electronics, which is what makes it a great fighter. It isn't just its maneuverability. It's certainly not its top speed. It's its stealth and its electronics. The targeting systems, the navigation systems, the surveillance, the radar, its ability to track all the different things in the air and acquire targets while remaining pretty much, well, very hard to find itself. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Yeah, because if you can't trust the U.S. as Ukraine can't, then how can we possibly trust them as long as Donald Trump is in the White House? And if you disagree with him, he might just flip a switch, and those $85 million fighter jets would become paperweights, useless, unable to fly them. Now, the carbon tax issue. Yes, I did mention the other night, as soon as Carney said he canceled the carbon tax, I did say that, in fact, the carbon tax still remains on the books. What they've done is, because Parliament is not sitting and they can't really take it out of the budget, they really have just declared that they're not going to tax, or collect the tax rather, the consumer carbon tax. Effectively taking the tax to 0%, nullifying it, but they could bring it back. And that's what I said to, and I mentioned this, a couple of people have phoned me and we've had discussions about it. And I said, well, you know, when they get rid of a tax like that, especially during an election, regardless of what party they're with, they usually just bring something else in. They rename it or tax something different. And indeed, you're seeing that the industrial carbon tax remains in the shadows, Carney calling it a shadow tax. And so the numbers would just be adjusted later. I don't think it's gone anywhere, honestly, even though he says it's gone. You just don't see it. You just won't see it. It'll be a shadow tax, a tax on the components that go into all the kinds of things that are manufactured or contribute to the manufacturing of goods and services. And then you'll pay a higher price as a result for the finished products without really realizing the carbon tax is built into the price that you pay at the till. Now, that being said, a lot, and what Carney is also getting at, is that a lot of these products like steel that would be taxed, would have a carbon tax applied, are destined for export. And so that carbon tax then becomes a component of the purchase price of the consumer on the other end, which would be like a business, a production facility of some kind. If they buy a roll of steel out of Hamilton and it gets exported to the U.S., say whatever company purchases the steel to produce something in the U.S., they pay the carbon tax rolled into that, and then whatever they produce on the other side, that ends up in the product. You see what I'm saying? So there is that. But Poilievre today still hammering away on the Axe the Tax campaign slogan, which, as I said the other night, Carney has tried to steal that from the Conservatives, take the wind out of the Conservative sails as they turn the rudder into the direction of an election. And Poilievre, Conservative leader, not letting go. He's still determined to run on the Axe the Tax campaign slogan, still wants to make this a carbon tax election, that being the main issue for him, or so it seems. And we can understand why. They have a lot invested in this, and I think that it is true that the carbon tax is actually still kind of out there, still just cloaked. It'll be cloaked when the Liberals come back. What the Conservatives would do is, he says, they would axe it, get rid of it for real and for good. Would they do something different? Would they bring in some other kind of tax? Probably. Probably. They're politicians. But here's Poilievre today.
Before I begin, I want to tell the workers here that our hearts are with you. I know that this is a very difficult and stressful time. Some of you have already got layoff notices. Others are worried you might face them in the future. You're scared. You're stressed. You don't know what's going to happen. I want you to know that Canadians are with you. We will fight for your jobs, and we will make sure the supports are there in the event of layoff. We'll make sure that EI provides payment promptly to help you keep food on the table, and we will work to get you back into a paycheck as soon as possible. And I once again say to Donald Trump, why would you go after these people? These are great Canadian people. American workers, just like them, are going to lose jobs if this continuing trade war insanity goes on. There is no good reason to do this to these good people. Stop the tariffs, stop the chaos, let's solve this problem, and that will mean that workers on both sides of the border can get their lives back, and both the nations could be stronger, safer, and more secure. We will always be a sovereign, independent nation. We will never be the 51st state. We will always be proudly Canadian, and we will fight for the Canadian promise. I go further to say that that Canadian promise has always been the reason for my political career. We want this to be a country where hard work means anyone from anywhere can achieve anything, that a hard-working person gets a great life on a safe street and a beautiful house under our proud flag. But that promise is broken after 10 years of the Trudeau-Carney Liberals. The lost Liberal decade has seen, over the last 7 years, $500 billion of investment leave our country for the U.S. Our per capita GDP has been the worst growth among all of our competitors. Housing costs have doubled and gone up faster than in any other G7 country. And now the Liberals think they should be rewarded with a 4th term in office. Furthermore, they brought in a carbon tax in this law. This law is still in place, even though Mr. Carney has signed a fake executive order to hide the tax for 35 or 40 days leading up to the election. It is still in place, and it applies across the board. The tax is scheduled to go up 300% over the next 5 years, and hiding it for a few weeks will not change that. Furthermore, the full carbon tax also applies to industries like those here at Iveco. Iveco makes hot-rolled steel wire and steel billets, and these taxes drive up the cost of the entire domestic steel industry. Mr. Carney has said that he wants to expand the industrial carbon tax beyond the already eye-watering increases the government has passed into law. He specifically singled out steel in an interview he did on CTV. He said that Canadians don't buy steel, they don't need steel, and therefore it won't do any harm to tax steel. Although he did admit that the tax would drive up the cost of an automobile by just $200. I don't think anybody believes that. Remember when the Liberals told us that the earlier carbon tax wouldn't cost you anything? We learned later that that was not true. Carney's proposed shadow carbon tax will be bigger than Trudeau's carbon tax. And it's ultimately a trick. Hide the tax before the election and then bring it back bigger than ever after the election. This was a bad idea before the Trump tariffs. But now that Trump is hitting Canadian industry with a massive tariff, Carney is saying that he will impose a massive carbon tax on Canadian businesses. The combination of Trump's tariffs and Carney's carbon taxes would be a disaster for the workers behind me. Workers would lose wages, consumers would pay more. Money and jobs would leave Canada, making us even more dependent on the Americans, just like Trump wants. It reminds us of Carney's decision to move his headquarters out of Canada to the U.S. This new tax would apply to lumber mills, steel mills, factories, aluminum plants, and they would in many cases simply leave. But I won't let that happen. Today I am announcing that a common sense, Canada First Conservative government will repeal the entire carbon tax, including the federal backstop that requires provinces impose industrial taxes. There will be no taxes on consumers, no taxes on Canadian industries. Instead, provinces will continue to have the freedom to address this issue how they like, but there will be no federal obligation to impose the tax. We will also axe the tax on steel, aluminum, natural gas, food production, concrete, and other industries. Instead of taxes, we will use technology. Technology, not taxes, is the best way to fight climate change and protect our environment. While the Liberals tax businesses who use energy, Conservatives will cut taxes and boost incentives for those who bring down emissions. Carrot, not stick. We will expand eligibility for the clean technology and clean manufacturing investment tax credits. We will reward heavy industries who make products with lower emissions than the world average. For example, Canada's industry produces 2 tons of greenhouse gases for every 1 ton of aluminum. China produces 12 tons of emissions for every 1 ton of aluminum, 6 times more. So every time you bring production from China back to Canada, you actually reduce emissions on a global scale. And I see there's some pigeons up there giving me a round of applause or something, flapping their wings, but a little bit distracting, but still no less. If you don't laugh, you cry in this world. Cutting taxes on clean production will bring jobs and production home and bring global emissions down. We will do this to restore our industrial base and take back control of our economy from the Americans. It'll be part of my Bring It Home tax cut on work, investment, energy, and home building. This plan will lower income tax, investment tax. We will axe the sales tax on new homes to save you up to $50,000 on the purchase of a new house. We'll lower taxes to unleash massive booms in our different sectors to bring home paychecks and productions. Our mines, factories, mills will be buzzing with work for our welders, carpenters, pipe fitters, heavy machinery operators, assembly line workers, sheet metal workers. They will be making more by making more. We will be a strong, self-reliant and sovereign nation standing on our own feet and standing up to the Americans. We will reward work, unleash entrepreneurs, harvest resources, make our own goods, trade with each other, build homes for our youth, rebuild our borders and military, honor our history, and raise our flag. What binds us together is the Canadian promise that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything, that hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful home, on a safe street, protected by solid borders and brave troops under a proud flag. What we must do now is to preserve that flag and its promise by working together, fighting together, and winning together. That is what it means to put Canada first. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
The thing about the Conservatives is they do tend to use incentives rather than
take
penalties.
questions from the floor. Please
That
indicate your name and your outlet.
Tax breaks instead of
My name is
taxes.
James Morgan. I'm from the Review newspaper nearby here in Vankleek Hill. I know many of the people
tax
standing behind you,
rebates as
sir,
well.
may even live in this community and read our paper. But anyway, I appreciate your commitment and your statements on economic sovereignty and approaching this tariff situation from that. Do you have any ideas, though, on cultural sovereignty to strengthen that, to complement the ideas on economics. I'm thinking of things like continued support for local journalism or local broadcasting.
Yes, we are strong supporters of local journalism and local media, and we will make sure that, for example, local media, independent outlets get their fair share of government advertising. I also think we need a renewed commitment to celebrating our heritage and our identity. Over the last 10 years, there's been a tendency to tear down our statues, change the names of different public monuments in order to cancel our history. I think that has weakened the bonds that used to tie us together. I believe that we should celebrate our history. We should honor our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, without whom we would not have a Canada today. His vision of an East-West nation is really now more than ever needed. So we will be naming public monuments after him and many of our other historical figures. We will put a renewed focus on celebrating the military history, the extremely proud military history that we have over a century of defending freedom at home and around the world. We will ensure that our young people have chances to participate in that history by expanding, for example, the Cadet Corps and other programs that bring our people together from coast to coast to coast to coast. Now more than ever, we have to celebrate our proud heritage and our common Canadian identity. That's what unites us. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
Next question.
This is Joe Coppolino from the Tribune Express Carignan, a local paper here. Following up on James's question, you've said that you want to get rid of the local journalism initiative, which is super important for our paper ourselves, particularly in this region where we are a bilingual paper, one of the few in the country and in the province and in the country. That program basically keeps us alive, particularly as businesses in this area begin to struggle, and I expect that they're going to struggle more in the coming years, regardless of which government comes on, given the economic opportunity outset landscape. What ways will a government support local journalism outside of the Local Journalism Initiative program, which helps fund many of the journalists in this area?
Thank you. Well, I have raised concerns with how the government has run that program and other media support programs. My platform will have measures that will strengthen local and independent journalism and give actually better and stronger voices to local journalism than we even have right now. So you'll have to stay tuned for that platform. We're just getting started. There's another roughly 6 weeks, and you'll be seeing a lot more from me, and I think you'll like what you have to see about local journalism.
En français, sur le journalisme.
En français.
J'ai critiqué la manière de laquelle le gouvernement libéral gérait des programmes de subvention aux médias. C'est trop politisé et leur approche ne permet pas l'indépendance dont on a besoin dans une démocratie libre. En même temps, il nous faut supporter les médias dans les communautés, les médias indépendants, et vous allez voir dans mon plateforme électorale des engagements pour favoriser les médias comme le vôtre dans les communautés, les médias communautaires dont on a besoin pour partager les histoires de notre pays. Merci beaucoup.
Next question.
Merci. Bonjour, M. Poilievre. Olivier Ferro-Boissé de TVA.
Bonjour.
Monsieur Carney, Mark Carney est en Europe aujourd'hui. Est-ce que dans le contexte, il aurait dû se rendre aux États-Unis d'abord? Et est-ce que vous exigeriez une démonstration de respect envers
les élections? Avec l'appui des Canadiens, je vais envoyer directement au président. Merci.
In English, please.
So there were two parts to the question. One is about the Prime Minister holding meetings with leaders in Europe. Obviously, Prime Ministers have to meet foreign leaders in France, the United Kingdom, and all over the world. But meetings alone will not diversify our trade. We have a decade of non-stop international meetings, yet the share of our trade that goes, our exports that go to France and the UK has not budged. Why? Because we cannot get our products over the Atlantic. The Trudeau-Carney Liberals have blocked pipelines, LNG plants, mines, and other infrastructure that is needed to get our products over the Atlantic to the Europeans. I give you the example of France. France signed a natural gas supply agreement with Qatar. We could be selling that gas. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas right beneath our feet. We have cold weather, as you're experiencing today, which makes it cheaper to liquefy the gas. We have clean hydroelectricity to power that liquefaction. The steel from places like this could go in an LNG plant, or in, I should say, dozens of LNG plants right across the East Coast and the West Coast and the Saguenay region. So why don't we repeal C-69, the No New Pipelines law, rapidly approve LNG plants, pipelines, mines, port expansions, so that we don't have to sell 100% of our natural gas exports to the Americans. I would have liked to seen Mr. Carney come home with a natural gas supply agreement signed with the French, the way the Qataris have done. We know they need our gas. Japan, Greece, Germany, France, and other countries, Ukraine, have all asked for our natural gas. But the radical net zero, keep it in the ground ideology that has guided the Carney-Trudeau Liberals for 10 years and caused the lost decade has prevented us from doing it. After a lost decade, we don't need to give the Liberals a fourth term. What we need is a real change to bring home paychecks and production and put Canada first.
This will be the last question.
Okay. We'll stick
Good
with
morning,
it.
Mr. Polyev. This is Kate McKenna from CBC News. Are you prepared to commit Canada to any kind of emissions target if you become Prime Minister? And if so, what would that look like?
We have to focus on technology and not taxes. First and foremost, we have to take back control of our economy. What would my emissions target look like? I treat this as a global problem. By bringing home production from more polluting foreign jurisdictions, we reduce global emissions while growing our own paychecks. I don't think it is an achievement to shut down a Canadian steel mill and then see one open up in China that produces 10 or 20 times more emissions for each unit of steel. What we need to do is acknowledge that the best way to reduce emissions is to bring home clean production here. For example, National Bank has calculated that we could displace 2.5 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions in India if we would supply them with our clean Canadian natural gas rather than having them power their economy with coal. 2.5 billion tons is 3 times the emissions of all of Canada. It makes more sense to bring emissions down by bringing jobs home through technology and not taxes, and that's what I announced today.
En français.
Merci beaucoup. La question, c'était par rapport à comment je vois les cibles pour réduire les émissions.
Okay, that's the last question. We don't need the French. So, again, Polyev really taking a conservative approach to a lot of these problems, especially the economic problems. And I've always been in favor of using incentives to achieve economic goals, not penalties. So instead of taxing things, you use tax breaks or even subsidies to incentivize behavior rather than penalize people for doing certain things. It's like housing. Instead of taxing people and then handing out money, it's like you provide. One of the most successful kinds of programs is taxes, like rebates, government rebates to upgrade your furnace or to insulate your home if the goal is to have people make their homes more energy efficient and modernize their home in that way. So you provide a rebate, a government rebate, which then stimulates that industry, especially if it's an industry that is lagging. So that's the kind of thing that I find really works. Or you have first-time home buyer tax breaks, or just financial incentives that make it a little easier for first-time home buyers to enter a market, to give them a hand up, rather than taxing people and punishing and then redistributing the income. Just my preference, and I think that's kind of what we're hearing from Pierre Poilievre. And yeah, the carbon tax is still alive and well under the Liberals. It's just being woven into the fabric of the cost of goods, because it's not going to be up front in a consumer carbon tax. It'll be in the industrial side, production, along the supply chain for the production of various goods. Let's take a little break. We'll come back. We'll dig into some of this other stuff today, including this big issue about deportations. I'll be right back.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching. The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Okay, I'm back. Now, we'll kick things off for this segment with this post from Donald Trump talking about the airstrikes that he initiated on the Houthis. There it is. Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that that force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. And that's digitally signed by Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. And indeed, they have been launching attacks on the Houthis. Just one of the subjects that came up in today's White House media briefing with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Let's go to that. We went pretty long on these other newsers today with Carney and Poilievre. We'll try to keep this one brief to kind of keep the program moving along. A lot of ground to cover, but yeah, she's going to address the Houthis, and then I think she's going to get into probably this issue of deportation and the court order that Trump has defied. Here she is.
The president has had a very busy weekend, making our country and the world a much safer place. President Trump ordered decisive military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. These Houthi terrorists have engaged in piracy, violence, and terrorism against American ships for years under the Biden administration, costing billions of dollars and putting innocent lives at risk. Joe Biden's pathetic weakness invited these unacceptable attacks. But there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Donald Trump. And the world is officially on notice. America has a commander-in-chief whose peace through strength approach is unwavering and should not be tested. As the president said, no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing throughout the world. Houthi terrorists and their Iranian backers should not cross President Trump again, and the president has made that clear today. On another important matter, President Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by the foreign terrorist organization Tren de Aragua. At the president's direction, the Department of Homeland Security carried out a counter-terrorism operation deporting nearly 200 violent Tren de Aragua terrorists, which will save countless American lives. Thanks to the great work of the Department of State, these heinous monsters were extracted and removed to El Salvador, where they will no longer be able to pose any threats to the American public. Tren de Aragua is one of the most ruthless terrorist gangs in the world, and they are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes that have occurred in our nation's history in recent years, including the savage murders of beautiful Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray. President Trump promised Laken and Jocelyn's families during his campaign that he would demand justice for their beautiful girls, and that's exactly what he did. As the president acknowledged during his inaugural address on January 20th, he pledged to invoke this act, and he has no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions. President Trump will continue his historic efforts to seal the border and prevent these illegal invaders from coming here in the first place. As the New York Times is acknowledged over the weekend, President Trump's policies are working. Here's how the Times summed it up. Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border are down to their lowest level in decades. Once crowded migrant shelters are empty. Instead of heading north, people stranded in Mexico are starting to return home in bigger numbers. The border is almost unrecognizable from just a couple of years ago, when hundreds of thousands of people from around the world were crossing into the United States every month in scenes of chaos and upheaval. This is the Trump effect in action. And again, those are the words from the New York Times. We didn't need a border security bill. We just needed President Trump. All of these actions taken together are contributing to a wave of optimism about the direction of our great country. According to brand new polling from NBC News, more registered voters say the United States is heading in the right direction than at any point since early 2004. Americans support President Trump's common sense approach that's getting our country back on track in record time. Meanwhile, the president's critics can't say the same. That same new NBC poll also found that the Democrat Party has reached an all-time low in popularity. It turns out when you let your hatred of President Trump get in the way of doing what is best for America, the people reject you. Who would have thought? Joining us today in our new media seat is Kelly Meyer. She is a White House correspondent with News Nation. News Nation started in 2021 and is one of America's fastest growing cable news networks with a focus on news for all of America. It's part of a larger ecosystem.
Okay, enough of that. There's another side to all of this. We ran that story the other night about the Canadian woman who was scooped up while trying to have her work visa renewed and then thrown in jail. She was there for 11 days. This was down near the U.S.-Mexico border. She went to an office there to have her work visa renewed and ended up in jail. Also, we're getting reports of Canadians, retirees in places like Florida, being harassed We're seeing reports come out of retirement communities where snowbirds, Canadians who traditionally spend their winters and their money in Florida, many of these retirement communities right now are sparsely inhabited because a lot of Canadians are not going there this year. They're afraid. And that's the dark side, in part, of what is going on. And I don't think that is entirely unjustified, given what we're seeing and the rhetoric that we're hearing and the changes even to the laws that apply to people who go south for the winter and the new requirements for people who stay longer than 30 days. This is having a direct impact on U.S. tourism. So these are issues of great concern. And then back to this issue of the deportations. There was a judge who ordered a halt to the deportation flights of people accused, and I repeat that word, accused, of being Venezuelan TDA gang members under this Alien Enemies Act of 1798, rarely ever used in history. And they put these people on a plane, and they were sending them off to El Salvador. Apparently, these guys were mid-flight when this order came down. They were ordered to turn around, and they didn't. They were already over, I guess, international waters, and then I don't know how the law really applies in a situation like that, but regardless, they did not come back. And then the president of El Salvador released this video, which I must say the production values are stellar. You ever wonder why you feel like you're watching a movie? Well, it's because of stuff like this. I'm leaving the music in. Drone footage. President of El Salvador, known for releasing videos like this. Talk about reality television. They're from Venezuela. They're not even from El Salvador. But they sent them there because the U.S. is going to pay a fee of some kind to the government of El Salvador. Including you.
Nombre. Nombre. César Eliseo Sortomaya.
Easy.
somehow the government of El Salvador has become an extension of the U.S. justice system. Tom Homan, border czar, asked about it today. I have the exchange here. The issue here, of course, for some people who care about things like due process, asking Mr. Holman about this.
Carried out some of the deportation of the flights from being invoked under the Alien Enemies Act. How did that play out behind the scenes? Can you get a little to the timing with the judge's order?
Look, let me say this. You know, the president, through proclamation, took his authority under Alien Enemies Act and imposed it, which he has the right to do. TDA has been designated terrorist organizations. TDA is an enemy of this country. We know TDA, based on a lot of evidence, are part of the Maduro regime through the military and law enforcement. They've infiltrated them, and look, they've invaded this country to unsettle this country, through whether it's through fentanyl killing thousands of Americans or through the violence they're perpetrating in our cities. The president did the right thing. I stand by it. I thought we removed in one day over 200 dangerous people, including MS-13. It was the right thing to do. I see the video that President Bukele put out. It was a beautiful thing. These people are going to be held accountable.
Is every one of those guys a member of the gang? How do you know it, and why can't they sort that out with a lawyer and in a hearing, which is how it should be?
Look, we abided by the court's decision. His written order was on 5 illegal aliens. They didn't want to deport them, and we abided by that. By the time the other order came, the plane was already over international waters with a plane full of terrorists and significant public safety threats. And, you know, to turn a plane around over international waters, we're going to refuel over international waters, come back and bring terrorists back to the United States. That's not what this president promised American people. What the president did was exactly the right thing.
So they're all trained in Nicaragua, every guy who's on that plane?
I'm not familiar with every single case in that plane, but that's my understanding. MS-13 members and TDA members. And let's remember, many of those on the plane were removed through Title VIII, not through the Alien Enemies Act. So, again, it was the right thing to do. That's what the people of this country mandated President Trump deal with the border crisis, deal with illegal immigration, and deal with illegal alien crime, and that's exactly what we did. We removed terrorists. That should be a celebration. We removed terrorists from this country, and I stand by what the president did. I support 100%.
How do you determine whether somebody is a gang member? What criteria do you use?
To various investigations. You know, a lot of the ways we do it, law enforcement sensitive. I'm not going to share all that with you, but you know, whether through social media, through the activities, through their criminal records here and abroad. So, you know, this was done a very, the review of this issue was at the highest level I've seen. And I think, again, I stand by everything we did this weekend, and I think the president keeping his promise to the American people. We removed terrorists from the country this weekend. I can't believe any media would question the president's ability to remove terrorists from this country.
What do you say to those who say what do you say to those who claim you're using a 200-year-old law to circumvent due process?
An old law? Not as old as the Constitution. We still pay attention to that, don't we?
But some would say this is...
How many more terrorists do you plan on deporting to El Salvador?
Well, that's a witty comeback, but I have to say I'm worried about not what is being done, but the way it's being done. Nobody wants terrorists in your community, but how you deal with it is important. You know, Nayib Bukele, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, president of El Salvador, he releases those videos as you know, a strategy to project strength, control the narrative, bolster his popularity, both at home and around the world. And he's made combating gang violence a cornerstone of his administration. And those highly produced videos, they feature dramatic music, aerial shots, a clear display of state power. And it serves a lot of these different purposes. It's a public relations tool. It showcases mass arrests and the transfer of these alleged gang members to facilities like the Terrorism Confinement Center. Bukele reinforces his image as a decisive leader tackling the country's long-standing crime problem head-on. It's really, in many respects, reality television come to life. It's about deterrence as well, obviously, because the videos send a message directly to gangs, especially groups like MS-13 and Barrio 18, that resistance is futile. And it converges, it connects with what's going on with Trump. And that's what this video is all about. Now, Homan said that it was a beautiful thing. I didn't think that that was a beautiful thing. It was dramatic. It was powerful. Hardly, in my view, beautiful. It was an illustration of the dark side of society. It illustrates some very troubling and powerfully destructive elements within our society. And the arrests, the detentions, the way that it's being done, I think also highlights some pitfalls that I think Trump is falling into with all of this. What do I mean by that? Well, again, it's about process. It's about cutting corners. It's about, for me, denying people due process. And due process is important because if you violate the rights of one person, you're really violating the rights of everyone. Even if you're violating the rights of bad people, evil people, guilty people even. Asked the question today, how do you know or how do you determine what a terrorist is? Homan didn't really give a very clear answer at all. It really comes down to this. It's whomever they pick out of a crowd or whomever they accuse of being a terrorist. And then what they've done is they've taken these people. Who they are, we don't really know. They may well be gang members. Terrorists designated as such only because Donald Trump has declared them to be terrorists. So it's a unilateral declaration by the United States through Donald Trump that these are terrorist gang members, or through the government, a declaration made. And by designating them terrorists, their rights are diminished. But even so, while on a U.S. soil and detained by U.S. authorities, they are still under the provisions of the U.S. Constitution and have rights, especially as prisoners. Less so as terrorists, so designated, but still have rights and are entitled to due process. And even when the judge issued this order saying that that plane was supposed to turn around, it was ignored, and it just went on to its destination in another country where these prisoners who were arrested on U.S. soil and not given any kind of due process, just accused, convicted, and then sentenced to a flight to El Salvador. To a place where you have a president, a leader, who is probably best described as an authoritarian populist. And that is his ideology. He positions himself as a man of the people, railing against a corrupt elite, while using direct communication to bypass institutions and connect with citizens. And then he has been cracking down on gangs in his own country, with over 75,000 arrests since 2022 under a state of emergency in El Salvador. And he's selling that as a popular demand rather than a partisan agenda within his own country. He's also a disruptor. He rejects the old left-right divide of Salvadoran politics. and has cultivated a modern, tech-savvy image. Tailored suits, sunglasses, cryptocurrency advocacy. That's kind of the image that Bukele has generated for himself. And then this hard line on crime, just like Trump. And he is definitely in the authoritarian camp, certainly leans that way. And how convenient for Trump to be able to ship these prisoners off to a prison in El Salvador. So what's in play down in El Salvador really is a form of political realism, pragmatism. Yeah, it's a populist authoritarianism under Bukele. And it really does align very much with that kind of political ideology. His gang crackdown is a textbook example of this authoritarian mindset that he has. And yeah, for him, it's about pragmatism. Yeah. His approach to politics and governance tends to push it into the realm of authoritarianism. And that's really what we should be very concerned about, because these governments, these leaders, politicians, they rise to power vowing to combat things like authoritarianism, to protect people's rights, to make things right. When in reality, when they come into power, they, in cases like this, reject democracy, they reject the rule of law in the interests of getting things done. They want what they want. They claim to be fighting for your freedom. They claim to be advocating for your rights. But when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, they find it frustrating when they can't just get things done. So they jam things through, and they do an end run around democratic processes. That's really Bukele's brand of political realism and pragmatism. It does veer into authoritarian territory, often sidestepping or outright even ignoring democratic norms and the rule of law to get things done. Just get it done. No consultation. We don't care what the other side says. There's no room for conciliation, compromise. It's a trade-off that he's willing to make, and one that honestly his supporters are cheering for, and we're seeing it in the United States right now as well. But these things don't come without consequences. Take that gang crackdown that I've talked about in El Salvador itself. Back in March of 2022, he declared this state of emergency and suspended habeas corpus, expanded police powers, and that led to the arrest of over 75,000 people, many based on loose evidence like tattoos, as you saw in the video there. Oh, you've got a tattoo? Guilty. Off to the slammer for you. Or neighborhood ties. Homicide rates have gone down. That's a good thing. And so he's getting things done. But if you talk to groups like Amnesty International, they'll point to thousands of innocent people caught up in the dragnet that has been thrown over the country of El Salvador. Arbitrary detentions, no trials, prison conditions so harsh they've sparked torture allegations. That's not the rule of law. It's ruled by decree, justified by results. Is the sacrifice of one innocent person okay? in order to get those results? What about 5? What about 10? What about 100? What about 1,000 innocent people scooped up in these dragnets? Is it okay for them? And then you've got, back in 2021, Bukele's loyalists in the legislature sacked the Supreme Court's top justices and the Attorney General. They replaced them with friendly figures, or figures friendly to him. And this let him reinterpret the Constitution to run for re-election in 2024. Gee, where is that happening right now? Isn't there a movement afoot someplace, some big country someplace, some powerful country, where there's a movement afoot to let the guy who's managed to get back into office maybe run again for another term, even though it runs contrary to the existing Constitution as written and as currently amended? Can't quite put my finger on it, but it's out there somewhere. You'll probably figure out where. So, those people who support these kinds of actions say it's necessary because of decades of corrupt, gridlock democracy, which failed to fix violence and poverty. So why not let a strong hand cut through all the mess? And, the stats, the crime stats back up that kind of approach to a point. Murders dropping off. You're seeing absolute results down in El Salvador. And no doubt when you scoop up a lot of bad people, you'll no doubt see crime rates in the United States drop too. But do 2 wrongs make a right? Or is it okay to do even 1 wrong in order to get a bunch of things right? What about the innocent person that's caught up in that? Critics say it's a slippery slope, and once you normalize bypassing laws and institutions, you're not just solving problems, you're creating a system where one guy's vision trumps everything else. What's right, what's wrong? Well, it's whatever the guy in charge says is right. So yeah, Bukele's ends justify the means style doesn't, well, it does an end run around democratic principles and legality when it suits him. It's pragmatism with an authoritarian edge, or maybe even a buzzsaw. And it's effective for the moment, maybe, but it bets heavily on his personal competence and goodwill holding up in order to make sure that there's some level of actual justice employed. And so, too, are we seeing these kinds of things play out in the United States, I think. And when someone takes that approach, do they not then become the very thing they claim they were fighting against? You see, therein lies the trap. If you stare long enough into the abyss will consume you. That's the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. That's why I began the program tonight with a quote directly from him. It's a classic critique, what I'm talking about here, of this kind of approach. When someone like Bukele takes the reins with a pragmatic, results-driven mindset, or Trump even, bypassing laws, ignoring what a judge says, consolidating power, which we're seeing through Doge, and sidelining dissent, they can indeed morph into a mirror image of the corrupt or oppressive forces they swore to dismantle. It's the old power corrupts paradox. And Bukele's case isn't immune to it, nor is Trump's. Bukele, for instance, campaigned against a broken system, gangs running rampant, politicians mired in graft, and a state too weak to protect its people. His pitch was renewal, clean house, restore order, put the nation first. But look at the playbook now, stacking the judiciary with loyalists, silencing critics. Journalists and activists have been harassed. And even though, I'll get to it in a minute, and ruling by emergency decree for over 2 years, that starts to resemble the authoritarian tendencies of past Salvadoran regimes, or even the gang's own strongman tactics, just with better branding and state backing, and the veneer of credibility and justice. The irony gets thicker and thicker as you consider his narrative. Bukele frames the gangs as tyrannical scourge, extorting and terrorizing citizens. Yet his mass arrests, scooping up thousands without solid evidence, have instilled a different kind of fear in some communities, where people now dread a knock from the police as much as a shakedown from the MS-13 gang members. So the line then becomes blurred, with both wielding power through intimidation, just with different uniforms. Does a leader like Bukele see that? Maybe not. Bukele's self-image as a reformer, disrupting a rotten status quo, might blind him to the parallels. His supporters would say he's still the lesser evil, delivering safety where chaos reigned, but history is littered with examples. Pinochet in Chile, just so many other fixers who started with good intentions, bent the rules in order to win, and ended up as the new face of what they fought. Bukele's not there quite yet, or maybe he is. But the trajectory is certainly familiar. When you ditch the guardrails to slay the monster, you become the next one in the mirror. And when I'm looking at what Trump is doing, you can take everything I just said and link it over to his approach to this. You see, justice needs to be applied equally. It needs to be, if you do an end run around the law, if you violate someone's rights, then you're breaking the law yourself. In which case, it's a violation of everyone's rights. Because if the government can do that to someone else, they can certainly do it to you. And they probably will at some point. That's why due process needs to apply to everyone, especially the guilty, so that when they are convicted and sentenced and given due process, it's proper, and that through that process, their rights have been preserved, so that everyone's rights have been preserved. That's not to say that people who do bad things shouldn't be held accountable, that they shouldn't be convicted, or maybe even deported. But if you just start scooping up people and allowing officers in the field or the President of the United States or anyone to do an end run around anyone's rights, then it's an assault on the system. It's an assault on all of us. I fear we're on a very dangerous path in that regard. The entire country, the United States, under this president, is staring into the abyss. And I fear that we are about to be consumed. Let us all be very careful as we proceed. God help us all.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
President Trump today posted this online. April 2nd is the big day, and I think this time he means it. I think he's meant it all along. The date keeps getting pushed back. Let me show you. Posted first on Truth Social, then carried over to X/Twitter. April 2nd is Liberation Day for America, he says, because we will start taking back some of the vast wealth that has been taken from us due to the many weak, incompetent, and perhaps even dishonest politicians who have represented us in the past. And that means those tariffs is a-coming on April 2nd. And another big development today, those JFK files, the assassination files, I guess there are over 80,000 pages. And everyone has been waiting decades for this to come. And I was asking somebody about this just yesterday. Where are those JFK files that Trump promised to release? Well, here he is saying tomorrow's the big day.
So we're at the Kennedy Center. Needs a lot of work. We're going to fix it, make it beautiful. It's a very big part of the fabric of D.C. and the Capitol. We're bringing back the Capitol. We're bringing back our country. But while we're here, I thought it would be appropriate. We are tomorrow announcing and giving all of the Kennedy files. So people have been waiting for decades for this. And I've instructed my people that are responsible, lots of different people, put together by Tulsi Gabbard. And that's going to be released tomorrow. We have a tremendous amount of paper. You've got a lot of reading. I don't believe we're going to redact anything. I said, just don't redact. You can't redact. But we're going to be releasing the JFK files, and that would be tomorrow. Do you have anything else to add to that, Carolyn? So that's a big announcement. They've been waiting for that for decades. Then I said during the campaign I'd do it, and I'm a man of my word. So tomorrow you have the JFK files. What time will they be released?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Tomorrow afternoon, okay.
Have you seen what's in the files? Have you read them?
I've heard about them.
Was there anything interesting?
It's going to be very interesting.
Was there an executive summary supplied to you, Mr. President?
No, I'm not doing summaries. You'll write your own summaries. It's many pages. Is it 80,000 pages? Approximately 80,000 pages. So it's a lot of stuff. And you'll make your own determination.
Okay, so that's it. Coming tomorrow. I've been curious. I was wondering if it would really happen. Honestly. But it looks like we're there. Just check the chat. Anybody, any comments on that tonight or anything else? Just taking a look in here. Yeah, CBC Brown says the immigrants, they're here illegally out. Yeah, but under the Constitution, even people who are in the country illegally are entitled to due process. That's the point. But if you want to live in a lawless society where you just want what you want, you don't care about the rules, then you don't believe in the rule of law. And you don't believe in the Constitution. You don't believe in the law at all. You just want what you want. You just want people gone. And you don't care if Trump breaks the law or if police break the law. But if police are breaking the law, then who upholds the law? That's the point. And if they're breaking the law to do what they want there, what makes you think they're not going to break the law to do that over there? And when Richard Nixon said it's not breaking the law, it's not against the law when the president does it, Was that true then? And was that okay? It wasn't okay with people when he did it. Why is it okay for this? It is a slippery slope. Due process is very, very important. I'm not in favor of anybody's rights being violated, even people who are criminals, especially people who are criminals. Everybody is entitled to due process. To take that away from one person means you can take it away from anybody. And that means you don't have any rights. So if you really want your rights, you got to stand up for everybody's rights. You hear me? Listen. If they're allowed to just violate one person's rights, then you don't have any rights. That's the point. If you want your rights, you have to stand up for everyone's rights. What else do we have in the chat tonight? Yeah, Lindy says 60 plus years to play with the files. Yeah, who knows? Be Lovely says, not true. The law states you will be deported if you come in illegally. No, what I'm telling you is true. Even if you're here illegally, yeah, you may be deported, but you're still entitled to due process. You have to determine, you have to lay charges. You have to say, who are you? Why are you? You're accused of murder? Who are you? Look at the woman, the Canadian who was detained, thrown in jail for 11 days. She was never charged with anything. They just put her in jail. My advice is stay away from the United States right now. I don't want to go over that border. But hey, if you want to live in a society where the government can just throw people in jail, make them disappear, do you even know who it was? Who was deported to El Salvador? And why is he sending them to El Salvador? Why doesn't he send them back to Venezuela where he says they came from? But no, they go off to El Salvador. Is that just? How long will they be there? What's their sentence? Are they there for a day? Is their sentence life? 20 years? Taxpayers are paying for their incarceration. Do you want to pay for that for the next 20 years? 10? 5? Homan says he's not even sure what, the individual cases are all about. I know that it's a difficult thing. It takes a lot of time in court, or at least there has to be some sort of an expedited process set up in order to process these people who have been arrested. You really want to make a mistake and throw an innocent person in jail for 20 years or deport them to a country where they have no rights and they haven't done anything? They just got scooped up, maybe by accident. And because there's no due process, there's no possibility for them to have their case reviewed before they are shipped out of the country. This is dangerous. Very, very, very dangerous. We want to get the gangs out. We want to shut that stuff down. But you have to do it constitutionally. You have to do it so that people's rights are protected, so that your rights are protected. And I'm saying this tonight because I care about your rights, my rights, the fabric of our very society, the fabric of our justice system, about preserving a fair, just, democratic society that respects the rule of law, that does not give authoritarian power to the degree that we're seeing it exercised here tonight. You should all just maybe take this and think about it overnight and mull it over and maybe come back and we'll have a greater discussion with it another evening. But this is really, really fundamentally at the core of what our society is supposed to be about. This isn't Trump derangement syndrome. This is the kind of philosophical and even pragmatic decision or discussion that we've had throughout history. And we're having it again tonight because we are on that slippery slope again. That brings me to, do you remember the other night we had those three gentlemen on from the ourprinciples.ca organization? I just thought, let's bring up that, because those are generally, I would say, conservative principles. And not to say that this is the law, but these are ideals that they aspire to, and they like all of us to aspire to. And I thought, let's just take a look at what their, I guess, ideals are, and apply these to the current situation. Rights of persons. Every person has a body, mind, and will of their own. This guarantees them, A, the right to live free from intimidation, coercion, threat, or attack from any person regardless of their position. The right to hold their own personal beliefs and to express them in ways that do not harm the rights of others. The freedom to choose and to pursue their own goals while respecting their duty not to violate the rights of any other person. The right to join with others, to pursue their goals and to provide for themselves and their family. The right to the property that they justly create, build, or acquire, and to what they earn while producing goods or services for others. Property rights. The right to defend themselves, their family, and their property. The right to equal treatment as separate persons under laws that protect the rights of all persons equally. The right to equal treatment as separate persons under laws that protect the rights of all persons equally. I would say that fits right into what I'm saying right now. And two, every person has the right to be protected from attacks on their person or their property by any person, institution, group, company, or government. A, by threat, intimidation, exploitation, coercion, theft, or any other means. Or B, by virtue of laws, regulations, policies, or practices that violate the rights of any person. Again, I'd say B fits into what I'm saying here. It applies to some degree. Is Donald Trump following these ideals? Talks here, they go on about the family is a core institution that provides for the needs of persons and that protects and educates children in all thriving societies. It must be protected against unwarranted intrusions, including by government. And I'll tell you this, if they can do an end run around somebody's rights to just pick somebody out, make an accusation, you're an MS-13 gang member, you're on the bus, you're going to El Salvador, no due process for you, pal, you're a terrorist. Well, how do you know he's a terrorist? Because I said so. Well, what's the investigation? Well, we've got lots of evidence. What kind of evidence, Mr. Homan? Just lots. He has a tattoo. That's enough. You're gone. If they can do that, then they can come after anybody for anything just by accusing you of being a terrorist. Duties of government. Governments must protect and serve, not impose. They have been established to protect the rights of every person in a transparent and accountable manner. As a result, governments must protect every person from direct and indirect harms, aggressions, or threats against their rights by any other person, group, institution, company, or cause, by any foreign power or actor, by any agent of government, or by the courts. That right there, if this were law, would put an end to what we just saw alone. Shipping them off to a foreign power, violating their due process here on U.S. soil. And much of that also comes into play for all the prisoners who are being shipped off to Guantanamo Bay. I'm no fan of MS-13. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that if you want to preserve your society and have a real democratic, free, fair, just society, you can't do it this way. You have to respect everyone's rights and give everyone due process. B, must maintain and manage public property and common assets in a way that respects and protects every citizen's rights in those assets. Must create, maintain, or support essential infrastructure and services that serve the needs of all citizens. So that's a responsibility of government, provide roads and just critical infrastructure, I guess, which is open to debate, must assist with the essential needs of those who cannot help themselves with the aim of encouraging self-reliance. That's a socialist idea, strangely, coming from guys that I know are not socialists, and yet there it is, because they want a kind and just society. That's very Canadian. E must ensure that 1, no statute, regulation, policy, program, or action of government harms the rights and freedoms or the property of any citizen. Yeah. So right there, no statute, regulation, or policy, program of action. So you have to preserve people's rights, regardless. No citizen is deprived of their right to provide for themselves and their family through just means. No privileges are granted to any person, group, corporation, or institution. No privileges. That's complex. Probably open to further discussion. No domestic or foreign organization, company, group, or government undermines the rights of any citizen or lays claim to our personal or common lands or resources. Isn't that interesting? Especially now with these threats against our country and its sovereignty. No domestic or foreign organization, company, or group, or government undermines the rights of any citizen. Must hold full and open debates that engage the public in discussions of the reasons and risks associated with policies that will impact on the rights or freedoms of any citizen, on our security and national sovereignty, or on the future of our economy. Must ensure that citizens have an effective means of preventing the abuse of government powers. Yeah. On full display tonight. Of holding those in government and private offices to account for actions that undermine these principles and for damage done to the rights of persons as a result of their actions or omissions while they held those offices. Yeah, holding public officials and politicians, people in power, accountable for violating these principles. As representatives and agents of the people, those who hold public offices, A, must place their duty to protect the rights of members of the public ahead of their own interests and the interests of any person, partisan, corporation, institution, group, or cause. The rights of the individual, therefore, are paramount. That's really what that is saying, and I've always believed that. Individual rights and freedoms must be paramount. From that, you get true diversity, and from that, you get a free and just society. Without that, if you focus on the collective, and make that paramount, then you flipped it upside down and the rights of individuals become irrelevant. The bigger the state, the smaller the citizen. Responsibilities of citizens. This goes on, but that is the bulk of it right there. My take on this is that Donald Trump is not living up to those ideals. I don't think that, in many respects, not many governments do. And certainly we're getting an absolute violation of that on full display in a very dark way tonight with these deportations. I said a long time ago, and you can go back and find the archived videos of me asking this question. If Trump proceeds with these mass deportations, what would it look like? Would it actually be just? Would it violate people's constitutional rights? Both the rights of citizens and people in the country illegally, because even people here illegally or in the United States illegally have not as many rights, but they have some rights under the U.S. Constitution, under the laws of the United States. If you don't respect those, you don't have anything. And what Trump is also doing is he's trying to create a legal justification and immunity for these actions by declaring national security emergencies and declaring certain groups terrorist organizations. That gives the federal government more leeway, more ability to simply do what they're doing right now, which is to just say, you're a terrorist. We've designated this group that we believe you are a member of we believe that you are a terrorist, and so you are out of here. You don't have, you can't do anything about it. There's nothing you can do. In fact, that's in what Vladimir Putin has done by not declaring the war in Ukraine a war. He calls it a special military operation and has made it very clear that any soldiers that might be captured in Kursk, because that's inside the Russian border, will be designated as terrorists. And I tell you, more than that, he would treat probably all of the soldiers that are taken captive, perhaps even, especially if there's no peace deal, if they just win the war outright, they would treat a lot or maybe even all of the Ukrainian military people captured as terrorists, and therefore would not, the Geneva Convention and rights under those kinds of provisions would not be honored or recognized at all. As a result of that, you can imagine the treatment that they will be subjected to. And I'm just trying to take a light touch with that tonight, but I hope you're getting the picture. And that's why I think that we need to be very careful too about just taking a casual approach to allowing Trump to just declare without any kind of pushback or questioning different groups, terrorist organizations, especially up here in Canada, where I think the government has been compliant in that regard, hoping that he'll back off on this tariff war, but really just giving him more ammunition and more justification to do what he wants to do, because it's kind of like he's tricked you into sort of agreeing with him that this problem is as bad as he says it is, even when it is exaggerated, some of these issues that he has raised. And you know that he does that because he just makes up numbers that are many times bigger than reality. He does it all the time. It's part of the game where he creates a reality and a mindset that is skewed. Puts it in your head. Canada's trade deficit, $350 billion trade deficit. It is not. It's like about $40 billion. But in his world, it's much, much bigger. But hey, you got to be careful about speaking out against Mr. Trump, because when you do, you'll be accused of having Trump derangement syndrome. Apparently, he's a politician you're not allowed to criticize, lest his hardcore supporters will come into my chat and start hammering on me when it's my damn job to criticize politicians of all stripes. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to hold them all accountable, including Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh, and let the list go on. And Bernie Sanders, and any of them. But I don't know. Some people are so hardcore Trumpsters that they even want to pass a law that would make it illegal in some way to criticize the man in the White House. In Minnesota, they want to pass a new law. This out tonight. Here's a report from Fox 9.
Republican lawmakers in Minnesota want to, here in the state, add Trump derangement syndrome as an official mental illness.
The bill aims to change our state's definition of mental illness to include a form of criticism of the current president. Hannah Flood joins us from the Live Center with the details on this. Is a bill that's getting national attention. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. This bill defines the Trump derangement syndrome as an acute onset of paranoia in otherwise normal persons that is in reaction to the policies and presidencies of Donald J. Trump. Now, this bill lists symptoms as verbal hostility towards President Trump and overt acts of aggression and violence toward supporters. Currently, mental illness is defined as a disorder or other issue that is included in a diagnostic codes list. While it's frequently used by President Donald Trump and his supporters, Trump derangement syndrome is not recognized as a mental diagnosis. The derangement syndrome political phrase was actually coined in 2003 by a political commentator. The Minnesota bill borrows the exact phrasing that commentator used to describe Bush derangement syndrome, describing critics of former President George W. Bush. Now, according to online records, this bill is set to be introduced today and referred to the Health and Human Services Committee. It is unlikely to be approved by the split legislature, but we'll, of course, let you know what happens. Tom McKelly.
I would laugh because it's so absurd. But it isn't funny. You have people freaking out saying that Canada has descended into some sort of communist dictatorship with censorship and all of these problems. And we certainly do have some issues in this regard, especially with some of the new bills that have passed into legislation here in Canada with regard to social media. But this is as bad as it gets. A law that would define someone criticizing a politician as mentally ill. You tell me, are we on a slippery slope? Are we not, with even that, staring into the abyss? Is the abyss at this point not actually beginning to stare back at us? Are we not in danger of being consumed by the darkness that we dare to stare into? I will see you guys tomorrow night. Love you all. I hope this makes everybody think. 7 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow, on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.